This presentation was first delivered in December 2020 as part of the Time to Change Employer Masterclass on creating and developing a champion network. We hope you find it useful.
Hopefully you can see my presentation, but I just want to kind of clarify, because obviously you've seen these like 4 points. This is how the masterclass was advertised. It is literally touch points around creating and developing that champion network. It's such a huge body of work. Like there is quite a few things to think about when it comes to supporting your champion network, and also in terms of engaging your network as well. It isn't just about people being recruited and then that's it. How do you kind of work with them as you progress into creating that mentally healthy workspace for your organization? And then also it's really thinking about those boundaries for your champion network, which we will kind of touch on a little bit later on as well. So first of all, I want to kind of set the foundation. Like Ian said, developing a champion network is a huge body of work, and you may have noticed on your action plans that actually it's pretty much core standard 3. It's a huge part of the action plan, and it's because where you've got the strategic vision, which is the action plan around policies and training and everything around it and evaluation, how do you marry it up with the grassroots? How do you make sure that your strategy becomes real life and speaks to people within your organization? And it's the champions that essentially do that. So they are a really big part of your action plan, living and breathing. Okay. And what they do is they start those conversations about mental health. And I don't mean literally like, hey, how's your mental health? It is about checking in with one another, helping people to recognize signs. So having those conversations around what mental health means for us in the day-to-day. Holding activities to make mental health a very normal topic of conversation. I hate to say it, but it is ultimately a numbers game. The more conversations you have around mental health, the more normal it becomes. And we've seen this now more than at any times of our life. So with COVID, the impact on our mental health, because of lockdown, because of the pandemic, and actually it's becoming more normal to acknowledge that. So a lot more people are talking about it. So we know that it is ultimately a numbers game, in that the more you talk, the more normal it becomes. Champions are really key in helping to dispel myths and stereotypes. Even people struggling with poor mental health might have those myths and stereotypes, and that might be the barrier between them seeking help and not seeking help. So champions can really help with that. We've always said this in Time to Change: sharing stories and lived experiences is the most powerful thing that anyone can do to get people to change how they think and act about mental health. Because when you share a story, you provide information that others could relate to, that they might not have considered. And actually, the champion in themselves becomes the role model, because look, I've been through this and I've come out the other side. So therefore, if you are struggling, it's okay. With the right support, you can also come out the other side. So essentially, it's providing that point of peer support and making it easier for people to seek support. Now, I don't know if you're aware or if you've noticed this, but something that we have noticed over the years is that when it comes to peer support, people tend to go to people or approach colleagues that they feel will understand them. And that might be someone perhaps on their level. It might be the kind of job that they do. Maybe their lifestyles are similar. It's very unusual. I'm not saying never is never, but it's very unusual for junior colleagues to approach senior colleagues for that peer support without there being some point of like escalation. And likewise, it's very unusual for senior colleagues to approach junior colleagues for that peer support. So just bear that in mind, like when it comes to recruiting champions, which we will talk about a little bit later on, that actually we need to have a diversity of champions throughout the network. And then ultimately, it's also to signpost colleagues appropriately. Now, this is very much a nod to the employee assistance programs that you might have. It's the most fantastical tool that an employer could provide employees with, but it's also the least taken up. So it's about signposting appropriately, promoting the whole menu of things that an employee assistance program might have, and creating ultimately that community of experts to support that champion. Now, if you're in a very small organization or you don't have an employee assistance program, it's worth looking to see what support functions you've got available, and equally like what there is in the local community. And your your champions can help you to kind of develop that support function. So again, a very key reason as to why they're so important. And then I suppose ultimately they're there to help you implement these actions, to help maintain that momentum that you might have from the start of signing the pledge and moving on. So I would definitely encourage you to share your action plans with them. Like, a whole network of champions should never be working in silo. They really should be working with you hand in hand on that strategy thing, even if they opt to do grassroots types of activities. And we will talk about models in terms of how you can work with the network, because obviously you might not be able to work with like 300 people together in the one room, but actually how that model or network could look like. So I suppose for me, the real key reason and the end game is that you know, when you're trying to create a mentally healthy workspace, what you're essentially doing is giving every employee the choice to be able to say, do you know what? I'm not okay today, and that's okay, because I know I will be able to access support and support myself through this. That is the end game. That's the vision. And that is what champions can really help you achieve. So you might be thinking, okay, well, that's great, but what could the core functions of that network be? Well, for us, there are 4 core functions that the champion network could have. First of all, they can help shape your work to grow in ways that you wouldn't actually know how to, because you will know the policies, procedures, and strategies you put in place, but they will be able to tell you what's going on in front line amongst people in teams, what they learn from the peer support that they provide, from the conversations that they have. That can feed in to how you shape the more strategic vision. They can influence your work by looking over what you have done and feeding back so that you can feed that into the work that you produce. So for example, it might be that you've created like a policy and you have a consultation with a working group of champions, and they can actually tell you, do you know what, have you considered this, this and that? And it just makes it a fuller piece of work that speaks to your people, essentially. Remember that with this kind of work, it's unusual in the sense that you might have a particularly like corporate message or a work-based message, but this piece of work, the champions and what they do, creates that bridge between humanity and corporateness. So it's humanizing the work that you might deliver. It's also about participating in your work. They might share their lived experience, their expertise through events, provide peer support, etc. So again, participating in all the key ideas that you might have. So for example, on Time to Talk Day coming up or World Mental Health Day just gone, they will make real the things that you want to achieve to raise awareness within the organization. And then ultimately, it's also to support you in embedding that mental health strategy. Some champions don't want to do grassroots stuff. You know, people will come with a whole different skill set. Some want to be able to strategize with you. They will bring that experience. So it's sort of working with your champions to help you to evaluate your action plan so that you have something that fits and is accessible to your people for year 2. They help you to develop what's actually needed, so to speak, on the shop floor. So moving on from that, you know, one of the ways that the champions can really help you is by helping you to map the organization. The bigger you are, the more you're going to find there's discrepancies between different teams, different departments, different regions, depending on how your organization is spread. So we tend to use Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, just in case you're not familiar, Maslow, very quick appraise. Maslow is a guy from the 60s or 70s who developed a 5-stage pyramid and said that you need to, as human beings, as individuals, we need to go through these singular stages to be able to grow into who we are as humans and reach our potential. Okay, literally Maslow's hierarchy in a shell. However, it does lend really well to your organizational growth and your culture change. So if you were to map your organization, you know, he talks about physiological needs. So the first stage is that you would need the basic things like air, water, food. But in the organization, for example, those basic needs are things like, well, does every team or every department or every region or whatever have access to good facilities, good breakout areas? Do they have access to support? So do you have things like employee assistance programs or other support functions? Do they have access to adequate training, etc.? All these basic things that will help people do their role. Do they have like the right workload, or are they overburdened and stuff? It will literally map where people are at. Then you might look to see, well, okay, we've got pretty much everyone mapped out. They've got their basic needs met within the organization to be able to do their job. So the question for you, so Maslow talks about safety needs. Now, his perspective is personal security, resources, health, property. In a work organization point of view, what we're really asking is, okay, so people have the basics, but do they feel safe enough to talk about mental health? Now, we're talking theoretically, we're not even talking experiences. So if you were to talk about mental health, is this something that, people could have a conversation about, could attend a drop-in without worrying, oh my goodness, am I going to be labeled as struggling with my mental health and then penalized for it? So it's that safety. Are people okay to talk about it? You might find that in some areas in your organization they are, and in some areas they might not. And this is where there's an invitation to do some tailored activity to kind of bring that up. Why is it that people don't feel safe? Moving on, you might come to the stage of love and belonging. So do people trust their employer? Love and belonging for Maslow is about intimacy. It's about a sense of connection. So in the workplace, do your colleagues trust their employer? Do they feel that this is potentially tokenistic? Do they feel like that they are encouraged to look after themselves? Do they feel like they can call in sick with a mental health problem and not worry about consequences or anything like that? This is what we're talking about. Do they feel connected with one another? Do they look out for one another by recognizing signs? We've got the esteem stage, which, okay, fine, you have got that connection. You are able to work collaboratively with one another. But now we're looking at respect, we're looking at recognition for what we do, we're looking for the freedom to be able to express ourselves. And in the workplace, what that really means is that, again, how actively encouraged are people to look after themselves, to be more authentic, to be able to, contribute ideas and innovations, etc. And how seriously is that taken? That all kind of maps where people are at in terms of their mental health. And at this point, you might be thinking, well, okay, we are actively encouraging self-care, but is it just about the individual, or seeing the bigger picture that when someone takes care of themselves, essentially they are contributing to the well-being of the overall team? And then that means that the team is in a better space to be able to do well. So really thinking about it laterally. And then finally, we come to that self-actualization thing, which in Maslow's words is becoming Dalai Lama. But the reality is within the organization, is it so embedded, like your visions, your mission statements, your overall, objectives? Does it have that mental health stance in it? Is it that working standards and practice are so ingrained that, it's so normal, you don't really see the difference until you're consciously aware of it? I must admit, I haven't actually come across an organization that is 100% at that point, but that is the vision, because it's at that point that everyone will have the choice to be able to say, do you know what? I'm not okay today, and that's absolutely okay. So moving on from that, which is excellent news, because my my slides had stopped. But how do you create a champion network? Okay, so it's really worth thinking. We've talked about the core functions of it, but what kind of activities can you realistically expect for your network to deliver? Now, we suggest keeping it really simple, especially in the first year. So that is, and as you've put in your action plans, to raise awareness through the activities you deliver, thinking about training. So line managers tend to be a very key group that need training, and then being in a position to help those who might be struggling with poor mental health. So identifying what those support functions are, finding ways to encourage peer support so that people know where they can go to talk to about what's going on for them and get that help. So these are the core activities that your network might do. And then you might think, well, okay, well, we've got the core activities, but actually, how do we develop it? Before you go into recruitment, think about, because evaluation is a really key part. And when I say evaluation, what I mean is literally scoping. What are you about? How does your business grow? How is your business even spread? If you're a really small organization, you might decide the way you're going to recruit is based on what I've put here as more organic, multiple people led, because technically you can ask people to self-select, do you want to be a champion? These are the things we want to achieve. And they might decide, yes, I want to make a difference. And then you recruit people and they literally go on to do what they want to do, to raise awareness, to change how people think and act about mental health. And that works within the small organization, because without networking them, because you're small and you're in contact with one another, there's almost like a sort of quasi network going on there anyway. However, if you are a big organization or medium to big and exponentially becoming bigger, you might consider a more coordinated approach. So you might have a single person, depending on the size of your organization, or a team of champions who then coordinate champions outer. So almost like a tiered approach, if you like. So the central group will think about what's needed, do the targeted stuff, marry the strategic vision with more grassroots activity, like how does that translate? And then they will sort of support and guide people around them to be able to go and deliver those activities in their localized areas. And the positive thing about having this particular model, when you are in a big organization, is that you are able to create boundaries and guidance that will help people sort of, because the bigger you are, the harder it is to reach every single individual champion. So this way you have like a pathway where you can reach those champions, provide that boundaries and guidance so that they are working in accordance to the policies and guidelines that you have within your organization. So they're both approaches. There isn't one is more right than the other per se, but it is about your needs and the needs around boundaries, depending on the roles that the champions may have within that network. So moving on from that, you've created or you thought about like how you're going to develop that network. These are the things that you might want to think about. Now, I don't want to say you should do this and you should do that, because the reality is that every single one of you come from a very different organization. Even if you're in the same sector, your emerging needs might be really different. So see this more as an impact sort of questions to get you to think about assessing actually what your needs are, where you're at, and what will support the growth of your network. And a key part of that is having that senior buy-in or leadership or investment. Now, I know that for all of you who have had your pledge signing, of course, there is that senior buy-in, but really digging down, is it enough to sign the board? Is it enough to just put like sort of basic comms out? How supportive are your senior managers of setting up this network? Ask yourself, what level of investment are they putting in? Like, is there personal investment in it? Or do they see this as a benefit for the business? And actually, what are they contributing to that from either perspectives? Will your senior leaders be willing to promote the champion network in all other avenues? So maybe if they've got like staff comms that they allude to, like staff briefings and things that they might do, will they allude to the network there? Do your senior management allow a budget to support the champion network to help that reach? And also, and this is a very active open door approach, but are senior managers able to be approached for guidance? Could champions or anyone working on the network be able to approach them for that? There's something to be said, like if the more buy-in you have, the less likely the champions network will have a glass ceiling effect in terms of influence and shaping. So think about the core functions here again. Sort of linking with that is, again, the resources, budgets, and promoting it. At the end of the day, you've got two competing things. One, for example, the resources budgets that you might have to work with, but two, also, what will your organization, as in your colleagues, be ready to accept? So we don't really want to think about pie in the sky type ideas, the ideas that are really hard to reach. It's great to have them as visions, but sometimes that it's just not, like if you can't implement them to a certain extent, then actually that will derail your plan. So think about the resources that you do have access to, the different teams that you could work with. Is there, again, money, budget available? What other support could the organization provide to help the development of this? So, if you're in HR or if you're in occupational health, is there something around that you can kind of bring in to support the network? And I'm not saying that it then becomes HR or occupational health led. All I'm saying is that it's about, how do you get staff to take that initiative, to take it forward, but also benefit from some of the things that the HR function can provide. And also other teams, like I mentioned, so comms team, for example, they can bring their expertise on it. It doesn't cost money, they're already in there and they already know your audience. So really utilizing that support. And then also think about, and especially when you start to get people coming in and sort of expressing interest in the role, who is your target group within the organization? You know, are there people that you are actively trying to reach, but actually they're not engaging? Or is it that you've noticed that the same people tend to be involved in this and you're not reaching anyone else? So consider who they are. Use your champions to be able to tell you who they are. Think of the kind of support and activities that you might do to reach them, because remember, one size doesn't fit all. So remember your mapping with champions via the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is where it becomes really, really key. And then, of course, when you're thinking about recruiting and maintaining people, consider the size of your organization. Like, how many people would you need to start you off? If, for example, you've only got one person coming forward and there's like 2,000 of you, maybe peer support in the way that we recognize it isn't the right way forward, because that's a lot of people to one person. So it's really thinking laterally like that, depending on how many people have come forward. Again, resources is a very key thing. We don't want any pie in the sky type ideas. Ask yourself, actually, do you go down the self-selection route where people will say, I'm interested in this role, or do you allocate the role to individuals? We always recommend self-select because it gives you an opportunity to see where the interest is, and it gives you an opportunity to do some scoping as to why certain areas of your organization are not represented by champions, and having the opportunity to do some targeted work there. Think about the skills that champions might need. So do they need any kind of mandatory training? So for example, a lot of people are interested in first aid for mental health. So because that's the kind of support that they want their networks to be able to deliver. So that might require some training. So go out. You don't have to take the first or obvious thing. Have a shop around. There are actually quite a lot of products out there in terms of first aid, mental health, that might suit your budgets more and are more accessible. So do have a look, and then consider ongoing, how will champions be supported to deliver? So that was quite a lot to unpack. As you can see, it is a huge body of work, and it's not going to stop there. So we're thinking about how to engage and support Champions Network. Again, touch points, but these are some of the key principles. I'm not going to go through all of them because you can see them on your screen, but I suppose the key thing to kind of pick out from here for me is the equality, that, you know, everyone's contribution is important. There is no scale or hierarchy of that. You know, it's about reaching people. So the diversity, look at how diverse your Champions Network are. How can you work with other staff networks if you have them? For example, the BAME, the LGBTQI, disability, gender, any other networks that you might have. How can you engage? Because let's face it, mental health belongs to everybody, which means that anybody can struggle with poor mental health. It's about independence and interdependence, or what we like to call collaborative working. So how do we kind of do that? And then also, is there an element of celebrating champion networks and the work that they achieve? So that motivates them to continue, because now they feel like they're making a difference. So these are the underpinning things that you might want to think about consciously. Technically, a lot of them sometimes come in without you even realizing, but what if you put the conscious effort to consider every single item? You know, it's really worth thinking about. Now, I want to kind of talk about individuals very quickly, because when you're self-selecting, as in like when people are able to self-select into the role, they bring their own motivation with them. Usually you will attract people who have lived experience, or lived experience by proxy, which is that, you know, they've supported friends or family members or colleagues who have struggled with a mental health problem. And so when they come, or when they take on the role, they're doing it because they enjoy what they do. They enjoy, you know, making a change, making a difference. They enjoy doing it because actually, and maybe enjoy is the wrong word to do it, but they enjoy. Why? Because they've been there and they know how hard it is. And they know that actually, if they had known certain things, that might have helped them. So they go on to push that information forward so that other people can perhaps benefit from their experience. And then, technically speaking, people also create their own personal system to stay motivated. So you've already got that, you know, and that's fantastic, because if you're giving a role to someone, unless they have these things already going for them it's just an extra role. But for people who self-select and they've come from a personal place, they already are motivated, but there is still things that you can do as pledge leads or perhaps as coordinators of champion networks to maintain that engagement, to work with them. And that is by having this very small framework. Share your vision, share what you want to achieve through your action plan. You know, what does giving the choice to everyone to be able to say that they're not okay look like? Support them. Look at the things that they might need support. So it might be having like a buddy system. It might be providing them with the right resources to be able to deliver to that role. Help embed lived experience. You know, a lot of champions, like I said, will bring their lived experience and they can share that information with you. Like when I had my return to work, you know, this is what it looked like and this could have been better. And learning from that, you might input it into like a return to work process, which then makes a difference to another colleague who might be using it. Value. We all want to feel like we're making a difference. We all want to feel like we're important. So show that value. You know, well, how is the Champions Network important in creating that mentally healthy workspace? Make that really explicit. You know, identify why they've joined the group, which mostly is because they want to make a difference. But what does that look like on a day-to-day? What does that look like in terms of what you can kind of put into the champion's role? Champions ultimately, like I said, and I've said this about a million times probably now, they want to make a difference, but show them how. It's not enough to just say you're making a difference. Show them. So have you done any staff surveys? Have you done any kind of evaluation or any kind of like, you know, scoping that tells champions that actually it was a result of their collective work that's brought about that difference? So having tangible things, tangible evidence gives them that motivation to continue. Work with organizational growth as well. You know, the more you grow, the more needs, diversified needs that your organization will have, and your champions can help you with that. Because remember, you only have your eye on what's in front of you, but the bigger your organization is, the harder it is to have an eye everywhere, and your champions can provide that intel. So it's really key that you work with them in a growing organization. And then ultimately there's also this thing about the temperature check of the organization. So for example, if your organization is a place of well, like as in everything's going fine, then you know they can go on to do like well-being type activities, etc. But if your organization is going through change management, change consultation, redundancy, redeployment, whatever, then you know it's important to kind of work with your champions who understand the temperature of what's going on, you know, where are people at, and then deliver things that actually meet the needs of their colleagues right at that moment, you know. So again, a very big like sort of sense of please don't work in silo from your champions network. It's about working together to create that impact. So I suppose towards more of the final section is thinking about champions and boundaries. Now, again, it's a very big piece of work. It's a key piece of work because it's got to be relatable and relevant to your champions network and what they want to achieve. But the first thing I will kind of put out there is the champion role element, and specifically first aiders in mental health. If you have them, what's the difference? Now, very important that you clarify a champion's role. They need to be able to clarify it for themselves so they can explain to their colleagues what the remit of their role is and isn't. And there is a key difference between the two. So first aiders in mental health are essentially first aiders as in physical health. If there was a situation, if someone was having a panic attack, or perhaps they were having a breakdown, or perhaps like mentally, you know, they were in chaos and you know you just needed someone to respond to them appropriately, then you would, and you have first aiders in your organization to do with mental health, these are the people that will be called. They will provide that appropriate response, first response, and then make sure that person is supported in whatever they need to be. Champions, on the other hand, have a wider scope. So theirs is about raising awareness, theirs is about sharing stories, there is about, you know, dispelling myths and providing that sort of softer peer support, if you like. But that's not to say that first aiders can't be champions either. A lot of the times we find first aiders in mental health have both hats on. It's literally just being clear that first aiders would have this added element to their role if they are taking both hats on. So that's the key difference. And then I want you to think about, when you're thinking about boundaries, is think about this framework. You might have gathered that I do like a framework, but it literally does make it easier because it streamlines your thinking. And I've done it to 3 points. So that is role boundaries, organizational boundaries, and personal boundaries. Now, if you notice, role boundaries is very much about, well, okay, we've developed this network, we've developed champion role. So the boundaries are, this role is this role isn't this. These are the skills and abilities they might need. This is the confidentiality. This is the remit. This is the time allocated. Notice it's very instruction based. The organizational boundaries, on the other hand, is the relationship between the organization and the champion, and ultimately the champion's network. So, for example, the organization might provide organizational policies and guidelines, things around safeguarding, data protection, and confidentiality to look after the champion and enable them to do what they need to do to change how people think and act about mental health. And likewise, the champion also can expect something from the organization to enable them. And I suppose on the flip side of that is that the organization also expects the champions to deliver something or in coherent with their policies or whatever. So maybe didn't clarify it as well, but it's literally a relationship. The more the organization invests within the champion network, the more they deliver to it, and so you've got that like balanced relationship of trust and empowerment and encouragement. So relationship based. And then personal boundaries. Well, personal boundaries, by nature of what it is very personal to each one of us. What's right for me doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be right for you. So it's that thing of, being kind to yourself. What a statement. Being kind to me usually might mean like literally taking myself away so that I end up off the grid, no phones, no nothing. But for you, that might be your idea of hell, for want of a better word. So in that essence, it's about coming up with statements that are permission based. They give champions the permission to be able to look after themselves. So they can define what kind to themselves means. And if it means I have to step out of this role because I've got so much going on in my day job, then that's exactly what I will do. And I will come back in later. It's about talking to someone. And even though you've got the confidential thing, it's not about going into the details of who and what or where. It's just being able to talk about someone that I had this situation, I spoke to a colleague and this is how it left me feeling, and also being honest. Champions are also human beings. Sometimes you might have something really big going on for you, like you might be going through a relationship breakdown, a bereavement or something like that, and a colleague comes to you because you're a champion and they want to talk to you about it, and honestly you're finding that really distressing. So in that instance you might think, do you know what, I'm really sorry, but that's something that I'm struggling with, so may I suggest you talk to my colleague who will be able to listen to what's happening and make sure you get the help that you need. So permission based, having those statements to allow people to do what they need to do so that they are effective in that role as a champion. And so ultimately it brings us to the final scope of that boundary, which is safeguarding. Now, safeguarding feels like such a big word, doesn't it? Because it is. It covers a whole load of things like child abuse, vulnerable adult abuse, etc. It's a really wide thing. But for the purposes of this, within the mental health context, I'll start with the definition, which is, according to Care, Quality and Commission, protecting people's health, well-being and human rights, and enabling them to live free from harm, abuse and neglect. It's fundamental to high-quality health and social care. But what that means within the workplace, within the mental health context, is that it's about employers ensuring that employees struggling with poor mental health are supported appropriately, especially if they are at risk of harming themselves or their lives through suicide, for example. It's about ensuring that employees know where they can get appropriate support to address any mental health needs. So going back to that end game of everyone has the choice to be able to say, I'm not okay today, that's okay, I know how to get help for my mental health needs. And then finally, it's also about everyone looking out for one another within the organization. So equipped to recognize signs when someone might be struggling with their poor mental health and ensure that they are responded to and supported appropriately. And this is really key. I mean, from my personal experience, when I struggled with my mental health and I was having a breakdown, in all honesty, I don't think I had the capacity to be able to get the help that I need. It was my line manager's direct intervention and recognizing that this was potentially a safeguarding scenario that brought them to my door dragging me to the doctors and making sure that I get that diagnosis, because I wouldn't be in that place to be able to do that for myself. So it's literally recognizing those kind of scenarios and making sure that people are responded to appropriately. And then finally, you know, a lot of you might already have safeguarding policies within your organization, because you know you work with vulnerable people or come in contact with vulnerable people through your normal working ways, in which case you already have that expertise in-house, and it's just about creating that reporting or raising awareness arrangement where champions be like, yes, I've got a scenario where I think someone's at risk of harm, and they know exactly who to call for support, guidance, and help. But for those of you who don't have a safeguarding policy, we've got a toolkit for you that outlines everything that you need to know in terms of developing one, in terms of thinking about what you need within your organization to safeguard people, and also what you might need to do in terms of recommendations and next steps. And we've also done the hard work for you. We've created like a template safeguarding adults policy. So it's not the full one, it is based mainly to do with adults. And then it's up to you to kind of put your stamp on it, make it more bespoke so that it speaks to your audience. But yes, so I would definitely encourage you to do that as part of developing your champions network, having that space where they can go and get help. If you don't have a designated safeguarding team, these are functions that you can get in within your HR occupational health teams. And you can do that by you know, doing like e-learning from Future Learn or Open University, or even visiting like your local authority, because they or your local council even, because they hold the portfolio for all safeguarding within the area. But equally, you can also ask your employee assistance program if you have one, because sometimes they provide that function too. So really worth doing like your scoping work and seeing what's available. And so that brings me to the end. So if anyone has any questions, I would love to know them.
Developing. So there is actually a question now from Cheryl, who says, thanks for that. I just wanted to see if you had any practical examples of how leaders can get more involved with promoting their support, other than sharing of personal experiences and including as part of their meetings and agenda and comms. What might you suggest?
Okay, so I know that you've put something as a part of their meeting agendas and comms, but actually, what if they were to do actual actions to do something about it? So for example, if you have a network of champions, you might have a meeting that happens every quarterly, and they turn up for at least one of them and take on an action to do something. You know, that shows. It's really simple things. It doesn't have to be really big things, but basically it shows, you know, the organization that this isn't tokenistic, that our senior person is taking it seriously, and this is what they're doing to change how people think and act about mental health. So if they're doing it, this is an invitation for us to do it. So, you know, it's not just those things, even those things that you've listed there, if they did them regularly, will create impact. I've always been very shy of the really big, for whatever better word, sexy ideas that you might have, because they create that initial like, look, yes, we're doing that, but do they really create impact? It's the small little things that you do in between the big things that create that impact. So it's the little things that they might do, like by showing their face, by constantly making comments, by sharing their experiences, not like fully, it doesn't have to be fully, but just saying that in my experience, this, that, and the other. Small little bitty things. And if it's tacked on to existing business practices, then there's a real opportunity to make impact there. So actually comms and sharing stories really is a big part, but it's also taking on those actions and being seen to be doing something about it, if that makes sense. I just want to add, like, was it Bayswater? I keep forgetting, organizing, my memory's so bad, but the CEO did a podcast when lockdown happened, and he would kind of share his experiences through that, and people were engaging with him virtually, and that was phenomenal. You know, something really basic like that. So it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a lot of effort, but it just shows that, you know, everyone's in it together.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment, Runa, and a really good example actually around Bayswater Healthcare. Incidentally, we've just produced a case study for Bayswater Healthcare, which is on the Time to Change website. So you can find it on there. If you're having trouble locating it, just drop us an email and we'll send over a link for that. Laura's asked a really good question, actually. She says, do you have any examples of bad practice? So setting up let's start that again, shall we? Do you have any examples of bad practice when setting up champion networks? So things to avoid, I suppose, kind of pitfalls that you might see with some regularity that people can avoid.
Okay, so a couple of examples. There's a fun example that comes to mind where I've heard on the grapevine, I'm not entirely sure if it's true or not, but people were going through change management and they were given like a bag of oranges for their well-being. Now, I'm sorry, but that's really not going to cut the mustard. So that's a real big like miss if there. But in terms of setting up champion networks, I think the thing to avoid is, whilst boundaries are key, there is this thing of over boundaried and being, oh God, how do I put it, micromanagey about it. The bigger your organization is, the less control you will have of a champions network, especially the further it goes out within your organization. So you have to have that trust and that confidence to be able to create a set of robust terms of references or boundaries and then let people flourish. This is a very sensitive thing. It's a very personal thing. There will be some organic growth. So for me, the biggest thing that I've seen that could be really negative is really clouding that network, being really rigid, like not allowing it to do more than what is in the role description. And the role description is literally just this. We're just going to provide peer support, nothing else. Or we want a certain type of people to come on board and nothing else. If you have a network that has a whole range of activities that it can offer, you will attract people that could do different things. So you will have subgroups within the network. Some might provide peer support, they are better at it and have the appropriate boundaries for it. But others, I have worked with champions who just don't want to talk to people. They just don't want to. It's not their skills base, but they do want to do something in this space. They do want to make a difference. So they might do more practical based things. So I suppose adding limitations, adding extra boundaries and being really micromanagey about the network and its development is probably one of the things to avoid.
Yeah, Runa, just one more thing to add to that, which I think you alluded to in your previous answer to the question before, was around the kind of thinking kind of baby steps as well, especially when you're getting started, and not to implement anything too major from the start, and then maybe being disheartened when it doesn't come to fruition the way that you hoped or envisaged. Really conscious of time. We've got about 10 minutes or so, and there's a couple more questions that have come through. The next one's from Joe Hensey at Sheffield Mind. It says, great session, thank you. You talked briefly about evaluation. Do you have any tips for how we can best record and collect information to evaluate the impact of champions, to help encourage them, but also as part of wider monitoring and evaluation for the organization?
Okay, so for example, in terms of the wider organization and evaluation, in terms of impact, you can use staff surveys. So you might have a clear set of like activities that your champions have delivered, and as part of the staff surveys, I know that you might have a limited amount of questions, but really utilizing those questions to find out what people's experiences were. But then for me, it's about the softer touch, because it isn't always about showing impact. In fact, you might find that there's very little impact in the first year because people are starting to get used to it. But having like scoping things where people can feed back more personable stuff, like there's quality messages and things, that could be a really good way to evaluate actually how the champions network are doing. And it's important for them because it could motivate them to do it. So you can use staff surveys, you can use all sorts of other ways to have that quantitative data, which I will definitely encourage. There is such a thing as survey fatigue though, so just bear in mind that if you have a lot of them, I wouldn't always utilize them, or just use existing ones. But equally, it's more the qualitative stuff. You can do that through feedback from events and things that you've had. You could do that through like nominations or rewards if you have that kind of set up within your organization, or it could just be like feeding back, like at the end of the year, like we've got Christmas, do you want to put any notes towards people that have supported you or helped you, or anything that you've learned or whatever. So it could be really basic like that you can use, and all of it creates a fuller picture. But you know, incidentally, like just based on what Ian was talking about in terms of the baby steps, and sometimes, you know, working with your champions and finding that certain activities work and certain activities don't work, don't be disheartened by it, but actually that's brilliant. I would say be happy with that, because it gives you an opportunity to find out why didn't it work, what was amiss, what did they need, what didn't they get, etc. And these basic questions that you might have, like that will give you a bigger picture of what's going on. for that particular audience. To be honest, it's such a big piece. Like everything can be used as a point of learning. What can I learn from this today? From all different like kind of scales. So if you want, I can have like a fuller conversation with you about evaluation, but we really don't have the time to go through every single like prong of it. But these are the basics. So
Yeah,
that's
I completely agree, Runa. And I think as well, celebrating short-term wins in this is key, because to your point, this could take a year or longer to really come to fruition in seeing kind of quantitative results. So having that qualitative approach as well in the short term and getting people's feedback across the organization around the impact is also important. Daphne says, fabulous presentation, really sound advice. And Cheryl doesn't have a question, but just a point here, which I think is actually a really good point. She says, thanks. I'd recommend creating a Teams group for your champions to collaborate and share ideas and support each other, as ours is starting to work really well. And I couldn't agree more, Cheryl. I think it's so important, especially at the moment when so many of us are working remotely, to have a digital channel in which we can keep those conversations going and keep those networks together, to signpost, to share resources. It's really important to make the most of digital tools, and we do that as well. So good to hear that you do it. Also a question from Emily at the University of Sheffield, which incidentally I think is where you went, Runa. Do you have any do you have any examples of good terms of reference for groups of champions?
So I'm thinking of organizations where they've done it. I mean, so basically, I've worked with CR Civil recently, and they had 3 groups of champions that have come forward. But what they did was they developed a skeleton framework based on like the organizational stuff about what they needed from the organization, vice versa. They had the role boundaries, what they can realistically do and not do, and also the personal boundaries and stuff. And that then developed into a whole series of question statements and instruction base that people can use. And they did a follow-up session, or I think they're looking to do a follow-up session if they haven't done already. But the feedback I'm getting is that they're constantly like kind of developing that. And to me, that is a good example of it. There isn't a fixed one. There isn't anything set in stone. It's constantly reevaluating and rehashing that actually, does this work for us? Are we getting what we need using that 3-pronged approach? So in terms of examples, it's hard to say, because again, you know, without knowing your organization, without knowing the needs of your organization, I could be saying, yeah, this is good and you should go for that, but actually it doesn't meet your needs. The good terms of reference is one where it's always insular. It looks within itself. It looks at the people that it's working with. It's looking at what it wants to achieve. And then it's designed to meet the needs of everyone involved and everything involved within that. So again, the developing the action plan, the core standards guides, they have a lot more information. So core standard 3 in this instance. So do have a read of that, and it will give you a whole load of case studies of what others have done that you can look at to inspire you to create your own. And I will always encourage you to create your own, put your own spin on it, because your people are different to the people in other organizations.